John Wood Community College honored local and national first responders today as well. New at 6, JWCC students and area first responders watched a film from the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. The annual anniversary film honored the sacrifice that first responders and their families made on that tragic day of the terrorist attacks in New York City. Organizers say it's important to ensure those who were not born yet or were too young to remember are educated about what happened 23 years ago.
It's important to, one, never forget, pay the honor to those that lost their lives and pay the honor to those that sacrificed so much for what they did and what they continue to do. And honestly as well, it's important to ensure that we educate the folks that weren't alive or were too young.
The viewing was made possible through a collaboration with JWCC's Criminal Justice Program and the Quincy Police Department.